What would you say is the most popular topic with gamers? No. Besides slurs. That's right. It's difficulty. There's nothing that gamers love more than talking about difficulty. If you dare to mention any kind of controversy that happened in the video game industry a week after it occurred, then they will complain that you are just rehashing the same argument over and over again and you need to let things go. But that doesn't stop them from wheeling out the same discourse every year like clockwork. Often, difficulty is framed as some kind of accessibility issue among people that have low critical thinking skills. Yes, difficulty is an aspect of accessibility, but it's far from the entire picture. A game can be difficult but accessible, and they can also be easy and inaccessible. That might sound absolutely insane, of course. Surely, if it's easy, then anyone can play it, right? But no, that's just not how it works in actuality. Just look at a big chunk of Nintendo's library and you'll see exactly what I mean. Pokemon Let's Go is absurdly easy, insultingly so, but if you have a kind of motor disability, you're pretty screwed because you have to manually throw the Pokeball with the Joy-Cons. Nintendo is just the worst when it comes to accessibility. Usually, this happens when the newest From Software game comes out, of course, since they started marketing their games on their difficulty, and people like to pretend that they are brutally difficult, practically impossible in fact, but the truth is just that they are mostly fine, and people only pretend otherwise so that they can brag about it. Yes, Billy, we know you beat Dark Souls with no summons, completely naked, using a broken straight sword. We're all very impressed. Your cock is huge. Now please, go take a shower. We're begging you. Anyway, I'm not actually here to talk about Dark Souls. This is all just a preface for the actual thing that I want to talk about. Because, you see, the people that think Dark Souls is just unworldly in terms of its difficulty don't even know what true difficulty is. But I do. I have glimpsed into the most difficult and inaccessible game in existence, and it is amazing. And its name is God Hand. God Hand was published by Capcom in 2006 and developed by Clover Studios. In fact, it was the last thing that Clover would ever make. This was Clover's MO back during their 3 years of life, you see. They would just casually drop a game that was one of the absolute best releases in its genre, and then absolutely fucking no one would buy it, otherwise known as Okami's Law. Okami, as I'm sure you know, is an extremely beloved game by its fans, and is the proud owner also of the Guinness World Record for least commercially successful winner of a Game of the Year award. Sometimes we're unlucky enough to live in the worst timeline, I suppose. God Hand met with much the same fate as Okami, but it also reviewed worse. Not terribly so, but Okami received basically universal praise. And to be fair to our hard-working troops down in the game journalism gulags, not every publication reviewed it badly, just worse than Okami, but with one big exception. The IGN review of God Hand is infamously scathing, earning just a 3 out of 10 by their standards. For comparison, what that means is that IGN considers God Hand to be worse than Balan Wonderland, Aliens, Colonial Marines, and, if you can believe it, even the fucking Quiet Man. Like, come on, dog. Colonial Marines is practically malware, and the Quiet Man is, well, in keeping with its title, the less said about the Quiet Man, the better. So does God Hand deserve that? Is it truly worse than Metroid Prime Federation Force? No. Of course not. My man just got his ass whooped and then cried about it in written form. Not that I blame them, strictly speaking, mind you. God Hand is one of those games where the difficulty curve is really more of a difficulty overhang. What is it exactly? that makes God Hand so difficult, I pretend to hear you ask? Well, you see, basically it's down to the control scheme, because it's absolutely mental. You might be able to tell just from watching the gameplay that turning Gene, this guy's name is Gene by the way, seems pretty fucking laborious, and you'd be right, because this game has tank controls. Oh yeah, that's right, this game's a spectacle fighter in the same vein as Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, and it's got tank controls, which Dante, he doesn't really look like he has tank controls, you know? But wait, there's more to it than just that. Just tell me right now, give it an honest guess. What do you think the right analog stick does exactly in God Hand? Bearing in mind it came out in 2006, so after games like Resident Evil 4, meaning most genres at this point had really kind of nailed down what the optimal control schemes usually were. Just give it a guess. That's exactly right, Blue Yeti microphone that I'm pretending is a person for companionship. The right analog stick is for dodging. You flick that bad boy back and Gene will do a little flippy backwards. Slap it to the left and the right and you get a sidestep in said direction. And you slam it forward to duck the attack. This is essentially just mad science being performed in game design. I really wish that I could have seen the moment that this idea came into the world. In my head, I always imagine it as Shinji Mikami in Frankenstein's castle, black and white, cackling as thunder cracks in the distance while he holds up a PlayStation 2 controller. But if there's one thing you can depend on Clover for besides making zero money, it's creating some kind of weird gameplay gimmick that just sounds crazy on paper, and yet somehow they still absolutely nailed it in terms of execution. I'll get it out of the way now by saying that there's not really anything else about the controls out of the ordinary. The face buttons are attack buttons, except for circle, which is for contextual actions and interacting with the environment. R1 accesses the roulette wheel, special attacks. L1 is a quick 180 turn, L2 is taunt, and R2 is the devil trigger. Now, naturally, it takes a very, very long time to adapt to this kind of control scheme, though, just because of the movement and the right analog stick. But when you do get the hang of it, oh, mamma mia. Guys, trust me, it just works. The tank controls are easily the biggest thing that you're going to need to get over if you do play God Hand. Initially, I did kind of hate it, if I'm being fair, but after a while, I came to like it in the same way that I like Sekiro's combat, which I know sounds absolutely insane, but please hear me out. You see, Sekiro is my favorite FromSoft game, and it's not even close, because it honestly feels like you're going toe-to-toe with whatever it is that you're encountering. Sure, you do dodge and stuff in Sekiro, but when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, you will need to hold your ground and brawl it out with the enemy if you're ever going to actually kill them. Essentially, it's the only FromSoft game where I really feel like I'm fighting something, rather than just tumble-bumbling around at their feet and phasing through their attacks. God Hand feels much the same to me because of its restrictive movement system. You can't easily run away from whatever it is that's happening, and it's better if you just try and hold your ground and brawl it out with them as well, reacting to whatever your opponents throw at you. The restrictive movement essentially puts a very heavy emphasis on positioning, and it forces you to take very deliberate actions. In a game like Devil May Cry, it's a lot more freeform. You can basically just wing it and improvise, because the movement system is so much more freeform. Dante and Nero absolutely run rings around Gene, so that means if you just throw yourself into the fray without a plan, you're gonna get your ass handed to you real fast. What I'm saying is, God Hand is the thinking man's spectacle fighter. Now, if it was just tank movement in the games, then positioning properly would be nigh impossible, and that's where the dodge stick comes in. You see, the sidestep, while having an obvious use as a dodge, is also a quick way to reposition because Jean will rotate around whatever it is he's fighting. It's an absolutely amazing feeling to break someone's guard and then immediately dash to the side so that you can kick them down the hallway. This is an amazing utility to have because, as you may imagine, fighting multiple people at once when you are just one person is quite difficult. And this is a reliable way to give yourself a little breathing room so that you can focus on the other enemy for a while. Or maybe you're only fighting one enemy, so you hit them, then dash to the side so that you can bounce them off a wall because, you know, it's just really fun to bully somebody like this. Or you can move to push them off a cliff, all kinds of things. It's an extremely versatile move, and it's immensely satisfying. On the topic of crowd control, we should probably talk about how attacks work in this game. So, you see, Jean's moveset is actually entirely determined by you from this menu. There are a lot of techniques in the game, and you acquire them steadily as you go through, and you can put them wherever you want on the square, triangle, and X button. The square button is basically an auto combo. You can just jam on it and it will just mash out whatever combo string you have attached to the square button, with triangle and X being used for more contextually useful buttons, and then you can also augment it further by holding the left analog stick back when you push these buttons. You can really build whatever fighter you want in that case, and you just need to weigh the pros and cons of every move that you're taking. You could, I suppose, just make a list that was full of the highest power moves in the game, but you're going to get spit roasted for trying it. No, you have to think of startup, recovery, special properties like juggling moves, guard breaks, etc., etc. You have to take into account a lot of different things. If you're at all into fighting games, this will sound quite familiar to you, I'm sure. It scratches the exact same kind of itch and gives you just as much room for personal expression in gameplay. I personally prefer to have a lot of the faster but less damaging moves because I enjoy a faster pace of gameplay, and I can concentrate on dodging a little bit more while maintaining uptime. But I've seen other people who employ a lot more of the heavy hitting moves, they'll focus more on juggling, whole kinds of things are possible. And yes, basically every move in the game, with few exceptions, can be cancelled by any of the 3 dodges, so there's really a lot to min-max in this game if that's the kind of thing that you're into. This is an unbelievably unique mechanic, and I've never seen anything quite like it in any other game, I suppose, except for, like, Create a Fighter in, like, those old wrestling games or something, but not to this degree, obviously. It really is an incredible system, and there's nothing out there that plays quite the same as God Hand, but it's not all fun and games. Sure, you have a lot of moves, but whenever a move list is this expansive, there's always going to be some duds. The sheer number might look intimidating when you first start, but there are a bunch that are just straight up the exact same move with a higher power value attached to it. Some are also just complete jokes that you would never consider seriously using outside of memes. Which is honestly fine. I'm sure if you asked me to come up with 120 moves, I'd start repeating myself pretty quickly as well. What is here is already more than enough, and having all these moves be genuinely useful and unique would be beyond overwhelming. Even just trying to parse all of the information available to you would be like trying to eat a copy of War and Peace. You do have to buy the majority of these techniques as well, so it can take a while to get to the kind of things that you find personally interesting. Some also come out of random drops from unique enemies, and helping peasants also generally rewards you with one as well, or a roulette wheel move. Interestingly, you can also sell techniques, which I can't really say I understand the logistics of. I get that you have a scroll that the move is on, but then Jean will also forget how to do that move when you sell it. It's strange. In addition to the regular techniques, Jean also has access to the roulette wheel, as I've said a couple times. This is essentially just special moves that require you to spend a limited resource, these little balls down here, which you then recover by picking up these cards when you find them, because sometimes the enemies will drop them or you'll find them in a crate or something. Time slows down, and you get to choose from the wheel which move that you want, and much like the standard moveset, there's a lot to consider, and your wheel is fully customizable. So you have to ask yourself things like, do I want to use a high damage single target ability right now so that I can burst down a strong enemy and finish the weaker enemies off myself? Or do I thin the herd a little with a weaker move that is also AoE? Maybe I want to use the Ball Buster because it is an easy access move that gives you a contextual button attack. Hell, maybe I would just like to heal right now. I can do that too. Oh, by the way, time might be slowed down while the wheel is up, but it is still passing, so try not to start using it right before someone smacks you. Also, of note, Ball Buster does, in fact, require the target to have balls. So, if you use it on one of the women, a robot, or one of these two bosses, it doesn't work. You see, he lost his balls in the war. It's a very tragic backstory. It's a nice touch. It's one of those little things that really isn't a big deal, but just the fact that somebody did think to include it is great. And you can find a bunch of stuff like that. My personal favorite is that if you get these demon enemies down to 1 hit point, you can kill them with a contextual poke of God. Great stuff. Amazing addition. Give whoever put that into the game a medal. I can't praise the combat system enough, actually. It's amazingly well designed, and someone clearly thought the whole thing through because it all ties together extremely well. Hell, they even knew that the camera would definitely end up being a problem with this kind of control scheme if you were in a tight space, which you usually are. So anytime that a wall gets between you and Jean, it just instantly goes invisible and doesn't adjust the camera angle at all. And good job, because that would have absolutely ruined this game if the camera system was bad, but hey, Clover delivers once again. I only really have 2 genuine complaints with the gameplay, and the first one is the Devil Trigger. This TP bar down here is used to unleash Jean's God Hand. This makes him do more damage, attack faster, become unblockable, and take no damage himself. Essentially, it makes you impossibly strong and just encourages you to mash the square button and nothing else. I'd like if it did find some way to try and get you to use other moves that you have, but it doesn't, so you might as well just mash that square button as if it was the like and subscribe buttons. Okay, I'm gonna talk about it now. If you haven't seen God Hand, you've probably been wondering, what the fuck is up with that skull down there? You see, the game employs a dynamic difficulty system, and this skull here indicates which mode you're currently in, and these progress exactly as you would expect them to, with levels 1, 2, 3, and, of course, die. Let me say this now, with no exaggeration, God Hand is the most difficult game that I have ever played in my entire life, and it isn't even close, actually. Level 1 is the easiest difficulty, but is still very hard, while Level Die is completely fucking insane. Level 1 is relatively tame by God Hand standards, because enemies will usually be at least a little polite and let you kind of 1v1 while hovering nearby and swinging at you occasionally, and damage, while still high, isn't completely out of hand yet, but as you start ascending the levels, it starts getting out of hand real fucking fast. They will start to encircle you and attack you from off-screen. They will do more damage. Often more of them will spawn in. Bosses may gain additional phases. They gain new moves always. They block more. They dodge more. They start doing a lot more things. Level Die requires a frankly unreasonable amount of execution for most people to perform in. You need to be so calm, so calculated. You need to use every trick to your advantage, and sometimes you will need to sustain that level of gameplay for a really, really long time in between checkpoints. I love this genre of games, and I consider myself pretty good at them, mostly just because I've been playing them religiously ever since the very first Devil May Cry came out. And level die is still just completely beyond me. Level 3 is right at the edge of my skill level, and I get into level die occasionally, but I fall out of it pretty quickly. It's insane how quickly the difficulty ramps up between the levels. The majority of people who play this game will probably only hang at level 1 for the majority of their playthrough, which is fine, by the way. At the risk of triggering any passing Dark Souls fans, it is actually fine if you use all of the systems that are included in a video game, even if that system is one that makes the game easier, not harder. If you don't want to fuck with the higher difficulty levels, that's absolutely fine. Play the game on easy, stick to level 1, it's fine, do whatever you want, it's your game, you are allowed to enjoy it the way that you want to. Nobody can tell you what to do. There's even a non-removable option in the roulette wheel that does lower the current difficulty level that you're on. I do wish that that move wasn't called grovel, though, to be honest. I can't say that I care much for those systems that seem to mock you for wanting to use them in the first place, like those difficulty settings in Wolfenstein that infantilize you for picking them, or when a quit game prompt says something to the effect of press enter to be a quitter baby bitch. I just can't stand that stuff. Like, you did put the system into the game for a reason, didn't you? Why are you trying to get people to not use it? Just don't include it if you feel like you have to do this. But I digress. Let's talk about enemies now. Variety is actually pretty decent. I feel like the game lands on something of a sweet spot in regards to this, even if it is probably just because the game isn't super long if you're not dying constantly, which you will when you start, but that's not the point. You see, a lot of the enemies in the game are just palette swaps of each other or very slight model adjustments, but I don't really mind that myself because each different iteration of the base one, so to speak, is quite different. This is what this guy looks like at the start of the game, and this is a palette swap of him much later, and this one is significantly scarier than this one is. Essentially, the palette swaps just build on each other quite well, I feel. They start out very slow and telegraphed, and they gradually just get more and more intimidating. This guy's an absolute fucking nightmare. I hate him. Thank God there's only a couple of him. Holy shit, he is so much harder than these ones. There's not too much else to say about the default enemies other than that they are just mostly fine. They suit the game well, and they will put you in some interesting combinations of them that you have to find your way around. But I do want to quickly mention the special randomly spawning enemies as well. When you kill a regular enemy, there is a chance that they will spawn a demon, with a couple of exceptions that are predetermined. These are otherwise all random. So it fills an obvious niche of trying to keep you on your toes. Most encounters will play out exactly the same every time, but these guys will pop up just often enough that they will force you to think on your feet instead of just trying to flowchart the encounters. This demon spawned, and I'm currently fighting 4 other guys though, so what do I do about this? They generally get a little less aggressive if you're fighting a demon, so do I just try and get rid of the demon quickly? Do I use my devil hand right now to wipe them out real fast? Do I want to spend one of my cards so that I can just clear the encounter completely? There is a lot to think about, to be fair. But I can't really say that I care for the demons specifically in regards to this niche. They spend a lot of time teleporting away, and I feel like I'm spending a lot of time chasing them constantly. Yeah, that's right, you better run, you little bitch, because otherwise, you'd probably kill me. There's also this very rare version that is a much bigger boy, and I like these ones more because they don't do the teleport thing, then they are suitably intimidating. And last, there are these samurai guys that just kind of, well, walk into the game, and they would do exactly what you think they would do. They stab, they slash, they're good. Good enemies. Great, good, cool. Alright, boss time.
Finally! a boss fight.
Bosses are always the highlights of these games, and God Hand is no exception. My personal favorites are Elvis. Yes, his name is Elvis. This is what his theme sounds like. It's amazing. And Devil Hand here. I'm sorry, I actually don't remember his name, and I don't care enough to look it up right now. He's a tremendously forgettable person, but has the best boss fights in the game by far. He's basically the Virgil to Gene's Dante. He has close to the same moveset as you, and his fights are some of the most adrenaline pumping I've ever seen in my life. The fights are also the hardest, but man, once you get into the rhythm, oh, it's one of the purest duels in all of gaming. My hands actually hurt by the time it was over. Not all of the bosses are 10 out of 10s though. For example, there is an, if you can fucking believe it, 5-man boss fight.
Cardown Wild Joker! One hard gangster diamond! You can find me at the club! Have your pet neutered or spayed! Ow, 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 ow! I'm hurt! I mean hurt! Together we are the Magnetic Pow!
Douchebags.
And granted, the enemies that make up that boss fight are ones that are essentially always in a counter hit state, which means that your move's properties are amplified against them always, but it's just such a chaotic mess, dude. I fucking hate it. This guy also sucks. You gotta get him off this rock, but like, then all he does is run away and summon enemies to attack you, even if you never actually let him use that information and you juggle him constantly. So you have to just try and kind of ignore them while you chase the guy. Then he gets back up there again and starts throwing more rocks. It's such a chore, dude. Thankfully, you only fight him once, though. But thankfully, bosses like that are the exception, not the rule. Most are fine. There's also these 4 main antagonists you'll fight a couple times, and they are all very good to excellent encounters. The weakest is this stanky hoe.
There can never be 2 queens. Looks like this dog can be trained after all.
The only bitch that needs training is you.
Mostly just because she can turn you into a dog, and that just kind of totally kills the pacing. She also has a lot of moves that you can't interrupt and will require you to put a lot of space between you and her. It's kind of annoying, but the obvious counter is just get good, so yeah, it's fine. There also are a few cool mini-bosses. For example, I am a big fan of this gorilla luchador that is definitely not a man in a suit. And overall, the bosses and mini-bosses get a solid 9 out of 10, with only a couple bad ones. Great stuff. Knocked it out of the park, as always. Now, I could continue to talk about the gameplay for another hour or so, but I'm sure you're getting the picture by now. So to wrap up the gameplay section, God Hand is an exceptional spectacle fighter with a massive difficulty curve, and a lot of patience is required because of its one-of-a-kind control scheme. Takes a lot of getting used to, but once you do, you are rewarded with one of the most captivating combat systems you can possibly have. If you like games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta because of their combat, you should absolutely at least try God Hand. Though there is one other thing we should talk about before we move on to the significantly shorter story section. Remember about 8 or so pages ago when I mentioned accessibility in passing? Let's talk about that real quick. So, in terms of accessibility features, God Hand is the absolute worst game in existence. And I don't even really think that's that much of an exaggeration. Most of the control scheme is completely unmappable, which isn't unusual for console games of the time, but is still worth mentioning. The only things you can change are the 3 face buttons and nothing else. But there's more to it than that. You see, God Hand doesn't even have fucking subtitles, if you can believe it. None at all. It doesn't have the most basic accessibility feature. Hell, subtitles are barely even an accessibility feature. I'm sure that most of us play with subtitles on, regardless of if we actually have a hearing impairment, and it significantly reduced my enjoyment of the game, because sometimes these scenes are just really quiet, dude. And yeah, naturally there's no colorblind settings or anything like that, but that's not really a huge deal. There's no color puzzles, at least not that I can think of offhand, you know? Like, it's not really that kind of game. It's mostly just about fighting. And I am colorblind. It didn't affect me at all, not having any of those settings, but, you know. Basically what I'm saying is God Hand misses out on some of the most basic accessibility features we have these days. But to be fair, it was 2006. It was much less of a talking point back then, but it is still worth mentioning. So, what about the story, right? Well, look, I'll be honest with you. God Hand is not interested in telling a deep and rich story, and it makes zero effort to hide that fact. As I'm sure you could probably tell by the fact I can't even remember what your main rival's name is. The basic gist of the story is that you play as Jean. Jean was and still is a complete loser.
Damn, I'm poor.
He saw a lady named Olivia getting assaulted and he intervened. It went extremely poorly for him and he ended up losing one of his arms. Luckily for him, Olivia is the last of her bloodline that are sworn to protect the God Hand, so she gives one to Jean and just sends him out on errands now while threatening to cut it off constantly. So yes, literally all you do is just come and go to random places at Olivia's whim, beat some people up, come home, and then immediately leave again. Most stages have a cutscene at the start of them that go kind of like this.
Well, at least Olivia's not as bad as that crazy bitch. She went out again. Yeah! Olivia!
And then you are just immediately dropped into the stage like, oh, well, I guess we're here now then. You can actually even see me in this clip do a full turn to look at everything around me because I was so utterly taken aback by how abrupt that transition was. Like, where are we, dog? How did we know to come here? Where even are we? Why is there a UFO pyramid over here? What the fuck is going on? And the game has no interest in answering any of those questions. Why are we on this moving Howl's Castle deal? Well, why not? Because it's fucking sick. Shut the fuck up. Do you want to play the game or not? Pussy? Huh? Is what the game seems to say to you. There's also these 4 Devas of Destruction, or whatever the fuck they're called. They're just demons who want the God Hand. That's it. It's heaven versus hell again, basically. The closest we get to any real story development is how Devil Hand kidnaps Olivia so that he can marry her or something, and then he'll have both the God Hands, and I don't know. It's just complete nonsense. There's really no super coherent narrative thread to tug on. This is fine by me because I'm here for the gameplay, as you can probably tell, but if you're someone who absolutely needs a compelling story to get into a game at all, God Hand is definitely not the game for you. But I do recommend looking up the cutscenes for the game, even if you don't play the game. They are all at most a couple minutes long, and most are pretty decently funny. I do want to quickly point out, though, that this game does, in fact, include poison chihuahuas. They look like this. There's even a little puzzle later where you guide one to a sleeping enemy by throwing bones at it, and you can also race them as well. It's very good. I'm a huge fan of this. I would like more of this, please and thank you. Wow, that Sure was a lot faster of a summary than the gameplay, wasn't it, huh? So, that's God Hand for you. It's an amazing and criminally underrated game that not many people have played, but it is also clearly not for everyone at the same time, for reasons I'm sure are clear by now. Unfortunately, we'll never get another God Hand. The world is just not cool enough for that anymore. Tragically, the game is also quite hard to play these days, since it never really got re-released anywhere, except for, I think, the PS3 at some point, but I'm not certain. And that's a shame, because, and don't ask me how, but I'm pretty sure it's really easy to get this game running on PC these days, so someone should get on that, you know? In conclusion, if you like dumb cutscenes, chihuahuas, and being waterboarded, I highly recommend God Hand. Thank you for watching.